Hello everyone. Some journeys begin with a destination in mind, others begin with a question. Today's guest is someone who didn't just answer her question, she built a language around it. From the quiet hills of Jammu to the buzzing lecture halls of SRCC and DSC, to classrooms across India, to a scholarship winning stint at the University of St. Andrews, and now to Rodha. Nikita ma'am has taken English from grammar drills to a soulful art form. She has taught at institutes across the country, won hearts and minds with her inclusive approach, and built verbal aptitude classrooms where Potterheads, skeptics, and even sleepy heads feel at home. Today, we decode her journey one root word at a time. Welcome to the podcast, Nikita ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ananya. That's a very generous introduction, I must say. And really glad to be a part of this podcast. I felt like such a famous person, when you asked me to appear here. So, yeah, thank you so much.
So, ma'am, let's begin with something light. So, if your classroom were a book genre, right? So, would it be a thriller or fantasy or a philosophical memoir that leaves you with more questions than answers?
I think it would be an emotional drama. So, yeah, because CAT is such an entrance test where, students' emotions are always running high, especially something that I'm experiencing right now as we near the exam. So it's a family drama, so to say, where we have fun, we have light moments, we have tense moments where students feel, oh my God, I'm not scoring, what to do? So yeah, it would be perhaps be a drama.
I think you have spoken from on behalf of the entire fraternity of ERC teachers who actually feel the same teaching CAT students and all those B school entrance examination students. So, ma'am, let's rewind to where it all began, right? From the valleys of Jammu and Delhi to the academic rigor of SRCC and DSC, from chalkboards in Indian classrooms like we traditionally used to have, right? To designing English courses in Scotland, right? It's quite the journey, I must say. But where did the seed of all of it lie, right? Like when did English stop being just a subject for you and it became a language you want to speak to the world with?
Oh, that's a very deep question. So it has to do a bit with my family also. Both my parents are not very well versed in English, and they wanted their children to have, this English medium education where so that they had the kind of opportunities that my parents did. So I think I was always conscious towards this, but it wasn't like I was making a deliberate effort to like English. I like languages in general. So whether it was Hindi, Sanskrit, English, so I like that. And somehow my English teachers were amazing. So I got really lucky with them. And because of that, this seed of loving English, reading English was sown. Yeah.
Is there any specific moment from your childhood, from the classes that you mentioned from your teachers, when you actually realized, ki, ha, this is something that I really love? Like what words do have power?
Yes, so I am not an early reader, as in a lot of people love reading since their childhood. I am not one of those. I started reading on a sincere note and I started loving it in class 10. So I think it was a competition in class 10, an inter-school competition, where we had to, this was a Da Vinci Code competition based on Dan Brown's novel. And the person who was participating originally, he fell ill. So my teacher said that, why don't you substitute for him? So we had very less time and I had to read the novel in that duration. And when I started reading it, it was so gripping that I would read it during the zero period, during recess. So that's when I realized that I really like reading and especially thrillers. Then, so this was one moment. And then after my class 10 boards, my teacher suggested that I read Train to Pakistan. And it was tragic, it was crushing. I cried while reading it. So I think those were the moments that made me realize that I really love reading English language. So yeah.
That's really great. Like let's move to what you did after school. As we all know, I must say that since you've been a pass out from SRCC, right? So was that a culture shock for you in any way, like in especially for someone who started feeling so strongly about language, as you mentioned, like from class 10th 11th when you participated in that competition. So was there a culture shock doing a course of in commerce from SRCC?
So I didn't want to do a commerce course and I wanted to study English. Just that I got a good percentage in class 12, and everybody in the family was like that you're getting admission into SRCC, which is a dream for many, so you shouldn't leave it. And in any middle class family there are these concerns: what is the ROI, what are the returns that you'll get from an English honors versus, let's say, a BCom honors, and that too from SRCC. So my decision was based on those considerations. And it wasn't a cultural shock in the real sense of the term, because i I was born and brought up in Delhi, and the college was in Delhi. We had a fair number of Delhiites. In fact, it was good that I got to meet people from various states of India. And the shocking part, I would say, was that, in school, because I used to top the school, top the exams, so I was a star, right? But then when I went to SRCC, I realized that there are millions of billions of stars in this galaxy, right? So that perspective, that humbling experience, that is what SRCC gave me.
No, that really happens from like to people who really think in school when they top the school, when they top their classes, right? And when you go out in the world, when you have to compete with people coming from different parts of the country, that really is something that is very relatable to, I think, me also. But post SRCC, I think you joined DSE, right? So how did DSE shift your way of thinking, like especially academically? Because I think post that only you started or you have joined this edtech industry.
Right. So I think I've been very fortunate in terms of, realizing what I don't want to do. So my feeling that I don't want a career in commerce grew during MCOM. And I realized that I like language. I want to do something in language. I volunteered for an NGO called MAD, where I used to teach English on a weekly basis to underprivileged children. And that brought me a lot of joy. In fact, during that time, I also taught some classmates who were not able to attend classes on a regular basis, and they complimented me that, you do this well, you teach well. So I think somewhere there I found my ikigai, that teaching English, that this is something that I would like to do further. But it wasn't such a smooth journey as it sounds now, let's say some years later. There was a lot of self doubt, lot of confusion, something I see my students also struggling with right now in their early 20s. So a lot of that was there. I took a break post my masters, wherein I really thought about what I want to do, what I don't want to do, and then I entered this space of teaching English.
In fact, I think you've taught at many institute also. So, like moving across different teaching spaces, right? What did it teach you about the learners, about the perspectives of students, right, and about yourself?
Right. So initially, I remember, so the first session that I had, I just peeked into the class and I quickly came out. Okay. So first, students were thinking that I am also a student, right? And I peeked and I got nervous, and then I came out that, oh my God, how will I teach them? They look, slightly younger than I am, just slightly younger than that. So that was my first experience. But they were so accepting, so welcoming. They knew that perhaps theirs was the first batch that I was teaching. So one thing that, I realized, even when I taught in Delhi, in Bangalore, when I taught online pan India, even when I taught in Scotland, that people are really accepting, welcoming, empathetic by nature, your students. So you just have to build a bit of a rapport with them, and gradually, things fall in place. Um, this is one thing that I learned. And another was that, I always used to think that I like teaching adults. I can't teach children. So when I started teaching CLAT students, students who were preparing for CLAT, they were so cogent in their arguments, so eloquent, so respectful at the same time, and I learned something new from them almost in every session. So that really broke my prejudice towards teaching younger students. So I think these have been two major learnings. One is that just be honest with students and they are very welcoming, accepting, and the other is don't have these prejudices about students based on their age or any other criterion. So yeah.
Okay, and talking about that big leap that you took, going to Scotland for a course, right? Like you were married and deciding to pursue a course that's in TESOL that you did in from Scotland, right? So, what was the push or motivation behind it, and what gave you that clarity and courage also to take that step?
Uh, the push, I think the pull for me was always there. I wanted to go to a different culture and pursue higher education there. Just that my father wouldn't allow it earlier. That would he was protective and stuff, so I couldn't go before my wedding. So I remember that even when I was talking to my spouse before our wedding, I made it very clear that I want to pursue a course abroad once we are a bit settled. So this was always there on my mind. There is this friend of mine who motivated me tremendously to do this because she felt that UK is a very literary space, and she said that you belong here, you belong in the cafes here, you love just sitting and reading in this quaint backdrop, you love learning about the writers here, so you should come. So this was another pull. And third was, of course, that I got a scholarship. I think I wouldn't have gone if I hadn't got a scholarship. So yeah, these were the decisions. The courage, I am very fortunate. As I said, I had this friend who motivated me, and my spouse is extremely supportive, immensely supportive. So I think they gave me that courage.
Now I'm really curious to know about your experience there during the time that you spent there. Like how did that atmosphere in Scotland, as you said that entire UK is known for the literary and all those kind of disciplines, right? So how did that atmosphere influence your study of language, your way of teaching, and what how you apply the language uh, as part of like your daily life or daily routine?
Right. So I think one thing was that I interacted with some Scottish families, and as I sat in close quarters with them, I realized how their children learn English, which is their mother tongue, right from childhood. How it is different for us and slightly different for them. So that gave me some perspective into somebody who is learning English as a second language. How that would be, the process would be very different for them. So that was one. uh, Another, it also made me very aware of the inferiority complex that colonized countries have towards, let's say, not being able to speak English, and towards not having the right accent, the right pronunciation. So I realized that even when, let's say, Scottish people are speaking or English people are speaking, they may not pronounce every word correctly, right? They may not always be grammatically correct, and yet they are very comfortable with it. So not, and we on the other hand don't have that kind of comfort. We always want to be right. So it also made me very aware of, it made me question actually my love for English, to be very honest, because I realized that there are so many languages in the world. I met people from various countries, so many beautiful languages, and yet English dominates as a world language. So it made me kind of question that, I wrote this in an assignment, that is my love for English a Stockholm syndrome? That, just I just fell in love with my kidnapper. So yeah, there were a lot of questions, a lot of answers that I gained. Yeah.
In fact, we also got to know that you have been teaching the housekeeping staff English there, right? And then designing and teaching that workplace English to the housekeeping staff who actually have different mother tongues, right? It must have been emotionally rich, I would say, right? So what stayed with you from that experience that you had there?
So I think it was my first experience of teaching people who whom I didn't even share any near language, because their languages were Polish, Chinese, right? And one spoke Mandarin, while the other spoke Cantonese. Even there were differences. So one was that it again it made me realize the importance of actions, gesturing, how teaching is also a performance of sorts, right? So that is one thing that I learned. Then the fact that if, let's say, your students are eager to learn, you will somehow be able to convey it to them even when you don't share a language with them. So that was another. Third was that I think I became very aware of the struggles that they had faced to come here, to even know the kind of English that they did, the bits that they did. And fourth was that I felt that somehow if you're just able to put your point across now, it doesn't matter what pronunciation you have, what accent you have, what kind of grammar you have. So it's all about just being able to communicate. Communication is much, much bigger than all these things. So I think these are some things that I learned. And yes, they gave me a very beautiful farewell. So with that, I have a picture from that on my desktop. So that is something that stays with me even today.
That's really great. And in fact, whenever the name Scotland comes into picture, I remember of a Netflix series called Outlander. If you've watched it, it
I have.
presents a very rich Scottish Highland culture. There, the Highland
Okay.
culture that is followed across Scotland, which was much different from the British culture that used to be there in the medieval times. So, anything fun, anything different, anything unique that you remember from your time in Scotland, which is probably which was very touching to you, or which was a very fun experience for you.
Uh, Touching was Scotland's beauty. It's beautiful. The Highlands, especially, they are beautiful. The Scottish accent is very thick, somehow very difficult to understand. Like, I was able to understand my English teachers, but when it came to the Scottish accent, I struggled. um, Fun, I think this is a trait throughout the UK, that when you meet someone, you say you all right there. So initially, when somebody would ask me you all right there, I would be like, mujhe kya hua hai? Like, why is this person asking you all right there? And I'm like, yeah, yeah. Then I realized, oh, this is a form of greeting that they're saying, that you all right there. So these are just a few cultural learnings, and which were funny. And I think the British formality that was quite interesting, because, so for example, if you go to a teacher and she's busy, so she won't say, okay, I'll see you later, I'm doing some work. She'll be like, oh, I won't keep you any longer, I won't take more of your time. So that's how they would put it. So these formalities, navigating them, that was also quite different and fun. Yeah.
That's really great. In fact, I also remember my time from Europe when I went there on a student exchange program. I was based in France, in Paris to be particular, and I really loved about their day to day gestures that the European people, let's say British people also for that matter, how they react to the strangers around them, how they greet them every now and then. That is something
Hmm.
that stayed with me like till
Very
now.
warm. Yeah, yeah. So they would just say hi. Once I was so confused, have I met this person before? Because he very warmly said hi to me, and I didn't have any recall of meeting him earlier. And then I realized, okay, he was just saying hi just like that, just because we were crossing paths. So that's something that I really liked. I mean, going there.
Yeah, that's really true. So, ma'am, let's now take a bit detour from your journey, right? And talk about some behind the scenes of the classroom, right? So behind every unforgettable class, right, it is a lot of invisible effort, right, which someone who's taking the class might not be able to see, right? It's the teaching is not just about the delivery that you have in the classroom, but it's more about the design that you make prior to your class, right? So let's just go behind that whiteboard. When you design a VRC session, right, or when you design any classroom session, where does it begin? Like with a concept, or probably with a doubt that a student asked in the last class, or a feeling that you're trying to recreate in the classroom?
Actually, it's a combination of all these three that you mentioned. So, first is, of course, I have a set plan for, let's say, every batch that I teach. Okay, so these are the topics that I have to cover with them in these many sessions. So, I try to have that kind of structure because it helps me so that I'm not clueless from class to class. Then I try to make the sessions as engaging as possible, which takes me a lot of time, putting in memes and stuff. So I think that stems from the fact that as a student, I like engaging sessions. So I want to create that experience as a teacher. Another thing is that I always keep rooms for queries because I feel that the whole point of a live class is that you can ask your query from the teacher, right? So I keep that space. Then designing the session, just selecting the right kinds of questions and just having those spaces where I would explain the concept, how I would explain it. Will I give an analogy? Will I crack a joke here? So designing that's, I think, the major preparation. And so I shouldn't spill this, but yes, I'm spilling the secret. So sometimes students would tell me, ma'am, how are you so knowledgeable? ये आपको कैसे आता है? And then I am wondering, मैंने भी आज ही पढ़ा है ये, but then I have spent a fair amount of time in preparing for this, right? So I've spent a fair amount of time in learning about the background of the writers that I'm talking to you about. So I think it's not, nobody is born knowledgeable, or nobody is knowledgeable on a consistent basis. It's just the preparation, the effort that makes you knowledgeable.
And in fact, along with the preparation, along with the designing of the structure, I think uh, intuition also plays a pivotal role while taking a class, right? So how do you balance that intuition and that structure while you're planning a session?
Uh, so intuition honestly kicks in during the class. So when I'm taking a session and I realize, okay, ये नहीं clear हुआ है अभी सबको, so I would then give multiple examples, other examples. I would find another logic to explain the same thing. So intuition is something that kicks in during the class, and then I also gauge that, okay, what where the students are in, what's their current standing in a particular batch, and then I would take that feedback and design the next session keeping that in mind. So it's what I gather during the class. So one is I act on it right then, and then I act on it in the future sessions as well. Yeah.
That's true, but let's consider a scenario. Let's say you prepared or you designed the structure for a particular class. It really felt very perfect on paper when you designed it, actually, right? But when you actually go out there to deliver that just doesn't lend properly. So what
Hmm.
do you do in those situations? How do you adapt to it?
So I go with the flow. For instance, this happened recently that I took three passages for this one class, and I felt that I'll be able to do this. But the very first passage proved to be quite difficult for students. So because I saw them struggling, I thought that I need to give a background for this passage. I need to really explain it paragraph by paragraph to them. So I spent that kind of time on that passage, and then we didn't do the other two passages. So. So I think I accommodate that, and then the remaining two passages, I gave one of them to them as homework, that now you try this one yourself. Then one of them I took in the next class. So that way, I think through experience you learn these adjustments.
Having taught myself to a few kids for different examinations, when you talked about, let's say, if you come across a very difficult thing in a particular session, right? You try to simplify it, right? But how do you draw that fine line between simplifying that content and oversimplifying that content?
Hmm. A very interesting question. So if, let's say, I am making it very simple for them, I'll always be clear and tell them this is a very loose analogy. This is not a perfect analogy that I'm giving you. And my effort is always against oversimplifying things, because the kind of exams that we teach, their oversimplification does not work. So I'll rather want them to grapple with it, to take a pause and come back to it, rather than oversimplifying it for them, because it won't benefit them in the long term. Yeah.
In fact, I got to know that you designed, like, during your time at Scotland, I think you designed a very tactical way to teach syllogisms to visually impaired students, if I'm not wrong, right?
This was not This was not during Scotland.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, my bad, my bad. But
Yeah.
I got to know about that story that you used Bengals and all those things, and that really shows that rare kind of like presence of mind while explaining a topic to the needs of the students who you are teaching. So what actually inspired that, like, and how do you stay attentive as a teacher in those cases when you use different kind of methodologies like week after week in different sessions?
Uh, so for the that particular session, so this was a student I had, and of course, in our traditional classrooms, we don't have that kind of pedagogy wherein we can cater to the needs of any student who has some special needs. So I would give one-to-one sessions to him later on, and I had to teach syllogism to him because he was taking various non-CAT exams as well. So I thought, okay, how can I teach him? And fine, the tick cross method works for some, easier questions, two premise questions, but it doesn't work when the premises are multiple. So that's when I thought that, it's about circles, right? So if I can make him feel that, okay, this overlap here, this is some, right? If I can put in concentric circles. So I was wearing a bangle, and that's how the idea kicked in. And then in the next session, I brought in various size bangles and I taught it to him that way. So yeah, I think that helped him. He ultimately made it to FMS. So yeah, it was quite on the spot thinking for me as well. I hadn't really planned it in advance.
But that was really insane, like having that presence of mind, how you can use the things around you to actually teach students in whatever better way that is possible. So let's say shifting from, let's say, from the syllogisms, let's say we talk about grammar, right, which a lot of students find very very boring, very difficult, right? So how do you make those kind of topics not boring, I would say. Matlab, can't say interesting because of course not really sure that people get interested studying grammar and all who are usually not interested in the same, but making it not boring so that they study well, at least while preparing for any competitive exam out there, right? Let's say if student comes to you, "Okay, I get bored in grammar." So do you take that as a challenge for yourself? Ki, हाँ, I have to find out some creative way to explain that particular student or explain the entire class how, like, so that they do not get bored while studying at that particular topic.
Right. So I think partially that is the motivation, and partly the motivation is that as a student, I didn't enjoy grammar a lot. It was very rule oriented, and I thought that what if the examples were funnier? That would really make it come alive. So I try to incorporate funny examples. There are so many grammar related memes now that we live in the age of memes. So many of them. So now I actively make use of them, and involving students, asking them for examples, and making it very inductive, as in that you are not going from rule to the example to the sentence, but rather from the example, a number of them, you're deriving a particular pattern. So a particular rule, as we call them in India, they are actually patterns. So this is how I think I try, and it has worked so far. uh, just that sometimes I give them difficult questions, so then there's some cribbing that happens in the class. But otherwise, yes, the sessions, I think they're interesting overall. Yeah.
And how do you use stories and metaphors in making those sessions interesting? Like, do you write the entire narratives around a particular question type or around a grammar concept, like a metaphor that can actually like make it easier for the students to understand?
Not a metaphor as such. As I said, for example, if I'm explaining pronoun ambiguity, right, that a pronoun should not be ambiguous. You should be very clear about what does this pronoun refer to? What is the antecedent, as we call it, of this pronoun? So, for example, there's this joke that there's this man who has a kid in his hand, and he comes to another man, and he says that sorry. And in another hand, this man who's holding a baby has a diaper, okay, a used diaper. So he says, I'm sorry, could you throw it? So the other man takes the baby and throws it. So So I know it's a dark joke, but but this explains the pronoun ambiguity that is there, right? That it was not clear whether the man was referring to the baby or the diaper. Now, of course, if you said that, okay, but we can use our common sense, that's okay, which is something that we do a lot in our real lives. But grammar is a lot about structure. That if an alien also came to our planet, they should also be very clear as to what structure to apply. So this is just one of the examples that I use and enjoy using, sadistic though it is. But yeah, no metaphors as such. I do weave stories around questions sometimes. So when I'm framing questions, I like to frame some of my own questions around concepts. So there I create whole stories. That's something I enjoy doing. Yeah.
And that was such a great and such a fun example that you've mentioned. In fact, if I knew this kind of methodology that you use while teaching, I would have gone back to my time of preparing for CAT, and I would have taken those session of yours to actually understand all these grammatical concepts in such a fun way.
Thank
That's really great. But you know, as as you have also given all those examinations which you teach for, like CAT, ZET, and IELTS for that matter. So does being a student yourself of those particular exams change the way you empathize with your learners or the students who are learning for these examinations?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because when you sit for the exam yourself, you realize, okay, the student is not just preparing for VRC, the student is also preparing for QA and LRDI. They have to have, this kind of focus for not just 40 minutes of your VRC, but for a sustained 2 hours. Then the kind of challenges that they're going through when they are put in a time constraint. Um, so yes, of course, being a student, being when you take the test yourself, that is something that I think all of us should do. Yeah.
And I think that's a load of what goes behind the scenes of how a teacher prepares, what he or she has to go through before planning a session, before taking a session. I think that this is something that the our viewers, the students who are watching it currently should know about, that it takes a lot of effort while you actually plan a particular session for a particular concept, so small as nouns or pronouns or any other concept from a grammar, right? So let's with this, let's move on or shift our focus to something else. So in fact, uh, when we talk about teaching, it's I think it's partly about inspiration and preparing the content, but it's also about scheduling your things in a way that you can manage everything efficiently, as well as at the same time you make sure that learners also get to manage their schedules in the efficient manner, so that they can get the most out of whatever you're teaching in the class, right? And it looks effortless when you do it the right way, when you do that scheduling the right way, right? But I think there's a whole engine that is required beneath that hood of taking a classroom, right? So let's talk about that engine room, like your daily rhythm, your daily routine that you follow. So I really want to ask, like, what fuels your day? Like, what does a typical teaching day looks like for you? Like, how do you balance the predictability of the curriculum or the concept that you're teaching with the unpredictability of the student minds and the questions that they might ask?
Okay. Okay, got you. So I'll first answer the schedule part. So I'm not a big fan of timetables, hourly routines, schedules. So I remember when I was in again class 10, where seems like a very transformative year for me. I had this economics teacher who used to tell us that time management is syllabus management karna seekho. So learn to manage whatever tasks that you have in a day. Okay, it does not matter whether you start at 8 in the morning or whether you start at 12. As long as you're able to manage all your tasks, it's fine. So that is my firm belief. So depending on the classes I have during the week, that's how my weekly schedule would look like, right? So I would be working harder some weeks, maybe some weeks will be lighter. So that's how it works. Regarding the unpredictability, the anticipation bit that you're saying, so the predictability comes from the structure that I've already, given for a batch. Okay, these are the number of sessions that I'll take for RCs, for VA. So the predictability part comes from there. Okay, these are the kinds of questions that CAT has asked in the previous year, so I have to replicate this difficulty level. So this is where the data lends predictability. And the unpredictability part, that I think, when you teach a topic a number of times, you're able to anticipate the student questions, right? That student might question on this. Okay, this particular word might be difficult. This particular option is quite close. So the student will definitely question here that why not this? So having that clarity, this process of elimination. So I think anticipation is a muscle that you build, over the years of teaching. And of course, even today I come across some questions which I haven't anticipated, which I tell students, oh my god, that's a great question. So I try my best to answer it. And sometimes it's okay if you don't know the answer. I think admitting that, okay, currently I don't know this, I'll tell you in the next class. So that's my process. Yeah.
And as you said, like being a person who really doesn't plan everything with respect to the schedule, but rather focus on completing the task by the end of, let's say, a particular day, right? How do you advise students when they ask such questions? For example, let's say if a student comes to you uh, that I have a lot of backlog, and that backlog is giving me a sense of guilt that I'm not trying to finish the syllabus that I've left, and I'm not either able to focus on the syllabus that is currently going on, right? So for a student like that, what would you say?
Okay. So, first of all, for backlogs, I advise students to first finish the concept sessions. So, for instance, in critical reasoning, I have certain concept sessions, certain practice sessions. Same for RC, same for BA. So, the first focus should be to finish those sessions and then watch it at 1.25x because you have less time. So, watching it at a relatively higher speed, that can work. And fortunately, I think VRC is one such subject. So it's not quant that, you need to have finished a set syllabus, then only you can watch the sessions ahead. So once, let's say, a student has some idea of the basics, okay, the kinds of questions that are asked, they can join the new session simultaneously. It's a bit like LRDI in that sense, that they can join. So I tell them that don't wait for these backlogs to finish to join the current classes, just attend them simultaneously and you'll be able to pick up threads. So yeah, that's my suggestion to them. And regarding time management, it's actually up to them. When do they, example, there's this concept of interstices. So interstices are these intervals in time and space that we have. For instance, if you're a working professional, you're commuting. Now, if you're in a metro, for instance, in a metro train, what do? You can just, if let's say you're traveling from Northwest Delhi to Gurgaon, then you can just for 1.5 2 hours watch a particular session, watch a class. So utilizing those interstices. So this is my usual suggestion to them.
But at the same time, let's say when we talk about, like, let's say we talked about completing the backlog, and in that case you have to juggle between multiple sessions, that more than what you're supposed to do, right? Let's say this, when similar cases happen with you as a teacher, let's say you have a lot of sessions planned, right, that you have to take. So how do you actually disconnect and recharge between those sessions? Like how do you unwind from the first one and then move on to the second one? Because I am really sure that teaching and uh, have taking more number of sessions at the same time, it can really become very intense emotionally as well to you.
Right. So, if I have back-to-back sessions, although I'm very fortunate that Rhoda allows us that flexibility to have some space between sessions, but if I have them, then first I walk away from my desk. I just change the space. Then I like eating. I love eating. So I would eat something, drink something. If my spouse is home, I would talk to him. I avoid screen because I have to anyway look at the screen in a while. And that sort of rejuvenates me. Sometimes I talk to my mom, but just sometimes, because also I have been speaking continuously. So I try to avoid that. So yeah, and that works. That works. Just I think disconnecting from the space for a while, that works for me.
Okay, Nikita. So zooming out a little bit out of this entire scheduling part and you're behind the teaching scenes part. Let's talk about the soul of it. let's talk about the philosophy that you have for the teaching, right? So you've earlier described the language, English language, as your ikigai, right? So what does that mean in your life today? Like when it comes to the classrooms also, when it comes to teaching also, and when it comes to your personal life also, what does it mean?
What does language mean to me? Are you asking that?
You said that you've described it as ikigai, no? So
Hmm,
how
hmm,
that
hmm.
that word translates into your actions, your thinking, your philosophy in terms of your teaching as well as your personal life.
So I'm again, as I said, I feel very fortunate to be paid for reading. So I always used to think, okay, what are the careers that even that I'll just sit and read and I'll be paid for it. So of course, a significant chunk of my job is reading, reading novels, reading nonfiction, reading passages. So that I think I really enjoy, and that kind of happiness it shows in my sessions also at times when I'm explaining something that I have personally loved. So that is something that helps me a lot. Apart from that, I love interacting, especially with young people. I really like it when my critical they are able to understand various critical reasoning sessions, because I feel that I'm not just preparing them for an entrance through this. I'm preparing them for life, to engage in debates, arguments, counter arguments. So this fact that I like what I do, it kind of spills also into the quality of the sessions, the vibe that is there in the sessions. And for me, yes, it is very enriching because I the fact that the RC passages, that they can come from so many genres. So I also learn so many new things from an RC passage that I read. So yeah, I think really lucky there. Yeah.
But I think you'd agree to that we are currently living in a world where students consume dopamine more than depth, right? So how do you help them fall in love with reading again?
So I think this is something that all of us, whether it's KD sir, I, Prajesh sir, Sharwari ma'am, all of us have this philosophy that any beginner should begin with the things they already like. They should begin reading those things. So if, for instance, I like watching thriller movies, right? So I when I start reading as a beginner, I would begin with reading thrillers. Okay, if I am somebody who is big on romance, on rom-coms, I would begin with a romance novel. So first we tell students, okay, what is it that you like, right? Identify that and then pick up that kind of a novel. So JK Rowling, in fact, has this quote that if you don't like reading, then probably you haven't found the right book. So that's what I also tell students, that there is bound to be a book that will grip you. So find your genre, find the book, and start reading. So this is, I think, something that I follow. And I try not to be very specific in terms of my recommendations, because they would come from what I like and not from what they would like. So I give them a big list, okay, from which they can choose. And of course, they can choose outside of that as well. So yeah, this is the process.
And I think you have also lived your pedagogy, right? Having tested yourself across examinations your students take, right? So what did you discover about yourself, about your own learning curve in the process of appearing for all these examinations?
I think I discovered that preaching is easier than practicing. So a lot of times, we tell students, you don't have to panic when there's a timer running. But, when I took my first exam, of course, the same thing was happening to me. And I realized that uh, you have to be extremely, immensely consistent, and you have to adopt this as a lifestyle. So what I started doing was that I would read in a timed manner. I would plan my tasks in a timed manner. So I made time an integral part of my life initially when I was in the early parts of my career. And that really helped me, thinking in that manner, that okay, I have to finish this in this period of time. So that helped. And apart from that, I think something else that I experienced was that this happens, I've seen with a lot of students who have been very sincere and CBSE favorites, that they are unable to leave a question. So again, this would happen to me in the initial parts of my career, that I would also be, अरे मुझसे कैसे नहीं हो रहा है, that taking it on your ego. But then I realized देखो marks तो इसके भी 3 मिलेंगे. It's not like, I'll be rewarded extra for this particular question. So it's not rational for me to kind of linger on it. So I think these are the kinds of learnings. Then for instance, a lot of my students don't analyze right now also, that I've been telling them, analysis is the key, analysis is the key, just drilling that down. So initially I realized that maybe as a student even I was like this, that I would think of taking another test as adding more value than analyzing a previous test. So when you sit in the exam as a test taker, you realize how many of, let's say, these quirks that students are telling you are actually very psychologically true, and then you search for psychological solutions for them and implement them, and you're forced to be consistent. So yeah, these are my learnings.
Yeah, but alongside, I believe that when we see ourselves evolving from the phase of a student to the phase of the teacher, right, we get a lot of learnings. But I think that there are few things which stay consistent, and I think it the probably the next thing that I'm going to ask would be very personal, so you can of course choose not to answer. But of course this happens a lot with the students, but as a teacher, have you ever sat down and cried after a session, like either because it was very beautiful or it was deeply frustrating that you couldn't handle?
Not after the session. I've a couple of times I've got emotional during a session, because again I was describing something that was quite emotional for me. For example, I remember I was discussing Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's a novel that's about the psychological impact of racism and what inspired Toni Morrison to write it. And I was just explaining it to students, and I hadn't really anticipated that I would get all teary eyed, but it happened. And I controlled my tears like anything at that time. So, this has happened before a session, yes. This may happen with me. Mm, let's say I feel that I am not able to build in the kind of quality into the session that I would want. So that can be really frustrating for me, and this is something that it's a constant journey of working through it, of sometimes telling you that you should. So this is a learning that I watched something that said that stop when it is good enough. Like sometimes you have to learn to be a satisfier than an optimizer. So sometimes that perfectionism, and I'm not really trying to be like those students, like those MBA students who say मेरी weakness ये है कि मैं बहुत perfectionist हूँ, वो वाला नहीं है. But sometimes actually perfectionism can be your enemy, and sometimes being a satisfier and stopping when things are good enough can leave room for spontaneity during the sessions. So ये वाले learnings होते रहते हैं, and I'm sure that all of us have our frustrating moments, emotional moments before the class, during the class. आफ्टर द क्लास नहीं हुआ ऐसा रोने वाला अभी. आई एम श्योर, आई एम होपिंग कभी ना हो.
No, that's really true. And having learned a lot from your experiences, like in the past few years, from teaching and from being a student in all those examinations, like from specifically from the teaching part, if you could pick any one session, let's say from when you started your teaching career, when you started your teaching journey, from your early days, when you think that there's something that you would want to change from that session that you have taken.
Yeah, so I remember in the initial few sessions, I used to take notes with me. Um, while it's not an entirely bad practice, I would not call it that, but it kind of course shows that you're not perhaps very confident or very well versed with this. So if I were taking those sessions today, and which is something that I did later on, that I got rid of those notes, then I got a bit more into the depth of that topic. So yeah, that is something, if I could go back, I would change that. I would study so much beforehand, I would practice so much beforehand, that I didn't need to take those notes.
And was there ever a moment when any student taught you something during a class?
Yes. Oh, I had this student who was really good at vocabulary. This was in, I mean, there was a center in Kailash Colony, so I used to teach there, and I remember, the difference between resemblance and semblance, right? So a lot of my vocabulary is very contextual, right? So I honestly haven't really memorized word lists in my life. I believe in doing it. Okay, word par made easy. That is something I can do, but memorizing word lists is not my thing. So this student, however, he had prepared for some government tests and he had done that. And a student asked me the meaning of semblance. So I said similarity, right? And what I was doing was I was inferring from resemblance. Okay. And I said similarity. So then the student said, no, no, ma'am, semblance is apparent similarity. When you think that there is a similarity, but it actually isn't there. For instance, if let's say during a war, there is a temporary pause. So we say there is a semblance of peace. Okay. So it's very apparent, but it's not quite there. So yeah, that was and I really liked his way of explaining, the way, he told me the difference in the tone, in the giving an example. So you learn from your students every day, I think. And because of them, because of some students who are very inquisitive in the class, you are forced to actually, update yourself, learn more, and that's something I like about my profession.
And any feedback line from any student that has stayed with you?
mm, Feedback. um There have been a number of such moments, but I would talk about. So there are students with whom I have built lifelong relations as well. We are friends now, so to say. So there was one student who was interested in music, but then her parents were kind of telling her to go for an MBA because it's a safe career choice. And I kind of related for her through various passages, through various articles, how music and mathematics are related. So she was really grateful for that. And yeah, I mean, so that was one feedback. She said that, you've gone above and beyond in actually making me like what I'm studying. So that is one. Then there was this one student who I realized, when you teach, you realize, okay, this student is not built for an MBA, but rather for some other career, rather for some other profession. So I realized that for a student, and I also nudged her in that direction, because of which she ultimately ended up studying public policy in London. So, of course, she was again grateful, and we are still friends. So, yeah, these are the kinds of experiences that I've had.
And of course, I think these kind of experience are the ones which stay lifelong with you, and you any moment someone asks and you remember of those kind of moments which have happened. And I think these are also the moments which actually motivates and inspire you a lot to do such similar things which can actually change something for any person or any student, right? So
Yeah.
let's just loosen up from this deep discussions about the philosophy and all, and just step into something more playful. Okay, so let's move to a segment which I've named as Rodha Races,
Okay.
right? So to begin with, what I'll do, I'll give you a few sentence starters with a blank, right? So you just have to complete them as fast as possible.
Okay.
It's time to test you on whatever you teach in your VRC sessions, right? And of course, yes, feel free to be very, very poetic, very, very punny, or probably philosophical as well.
Okay. That's a lot of pressure, a lot of demands.
Yeah, but let's do that. I'll probably start with an easy one. Let's say, if not a teacher, I'd be a blank.
Writer.
Okay. Reading comprehension reminds me of blank.
It reminds me of articles. I mean,
Okay. The punctuation mark that best describes me is blank.
exclamation. And there's this hybrid that uses exclamation with a question mark. So I think, yeah, that one.
It's recently come into picture, like. in the today's lingo, Gen Z lingo, I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
which is used. Okay, the next one probably is my relationship with the word nevertheless is dash.
I think it's a very accommodative word to have because when you're having debates and you just put across your point and you see a hostile face, so you can say, nevertheless, what you're saying is also making some sense. So it kind of calms situations down. So that is my relationship with it.
Okay, talking about vocabulary, one English word I wish didn't exist is blank.
Literally, people abuse the word like anything. Literally.
That's really true. Okay. The next one we have is my VARC villain is blank.
VRC villain. Okay, so in what sense? As in
As a
the
teacher, of course, of course, we tell students come with a lot of queries. Ki, of course, I don't understand this thing in VRC. I don't understand that. But as a teacher, when you see that entire subject or entire section of VRC, what is something that you don't like properly?
Parajumbles has to be parajumbles because a lot of times when cat asks them, it's not even a complete paragraph. So they won't have a clear opening, they won't have a clear closing. They'll defy whatever we have taught students in class. So, so I think that would be my villain. Yeah.
Okay, and since we talked about Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, I think I would love to ask this one last sentence fill question, which is the Hogwarts spell that best represents my teaching style is dash.
Hmm. Lumos?
Oh, that's really a great one. Like enlightening the students and making the light everywhere. And in fact, I can't clearly recall that dialogue from Dumbledore regarding.
One only needs to remember to turn on the switch.
Correct. That's really true. That is the one I was remembering. And in fact, I think as a teacher, that is the entire role of a teacher while while teaching students. Of course, because of course there's a lot of learning which you can get out of the books. But the reason that teachers exist in this world, apart from the books that we have for the information, is just to explain them, just to teach them how to or when to turn on that light that is required. I think that is the most important part I feel about teaching. Moving to some different kind of a fun. Probably my next question would be based on the choice that I'll give you. So
Okay.
the choice would be between, let's say, a Bollywood movie or a cricket match. Like, what do you love or what do you like more? I would say
Hmm.
watching a Bollywood movie or say watching a cricket match.
Bollywood movie. Cricket match. I mean, it again. It's if you want a more nuanced answer, if it's India Pakistan or India Australia, then the cricket match. Otherwise, a Bollywood movie.
Okay, so let's say, of course, you must be teaching the questions and the concept of tones.
Hmm.
So in let's say if you have to explain tone questions using a Bollywood movie analogy, how do you explain?
Okay, so for instance, let's say if there is a villain and this villain is just trying to, instigate everybody against, let's say it's a family drama again, right? So incendiary is a tone that would go with it. Aag lagana, right? So what you would see in a lot of family dramas. So yeah, I would take scenes from various movies and then teach them tones. In fact, that's a good idea. Yeah. So.
And let's say if I were a 5-year-old kid, right, who just lost my cookie or just lost my toy which I used to play with, right, and you have to explain me the difference between inference and assumption.
Okay.
How would you explain?
Inference and assumption. You've just lost a cookie.
Any toy or anything that you really like as a 5-year-old kid.
Okay, okay. So, by if let's say you're sad, right? Um, this is a hard one. I think Assumption is based on our beliefs, right? So, as a 5 year old, if you have a sibling, uh, your assumption could be that your sibling has not eaten it, but it's not an inference, right? The sibling could have eaten it. So, probably something through that, I could explain the difference that it's your assumption that your sibling has not eaten it, but you can't infer it. They may have eaten it. So,
Yeah, yeah. That's I think very very, I would say, interesting way of explaining such concepts that we usually use in the classes and all. And I really loved putting you into that situation on of
fine.
thinking how you can actually explain these kind of different concepts to different kind of audience that you get in the classrooms. I really love that part. So like before we wrap up with the entire session, let's talk about a few reflections, you know, for students or for any student out there who's ever started with very little knowledge or little confidence, low confidence on solving VRC questions. Let's say who's ever stared at a blank RC, right, or has been stuck between two close options, which we see in an examination like that, right? What all would be your advices that you also wish someone would have told you back when you might be struggling while preparing for those examinations?
One is that the only way is through. I think this is one of my favorite quotes that, you know, because let's say India's standards of living now are better than what they used to be when our parents were young. So we have had relatively comfortable lifestyles. And that's why, a lot of us don't want to struggle. But it's only through struggle because, knowledge is something that you can't buy, right? You have to really struggle with that RC passage. You have to sit with it. You have to spend time with it, sort of befriend it. Let's say you've met it, this RC is a stranger. So befriend it gradually. First, get to know it, search the various words that have been used in it, concepts that have been used in it, then read it again with that knowledge. So now, you are acquaintances. Then, let's say, perhaps let's say just sleep on it, don't read it right away. The next day when your mind has had time to process all those new terms that you learned, now read it again. Perhaps it will appear much simpler. That means now you've become friends. So it's a process, it's a journey. It doesn't happen in a day. That's one thing. When you're stuck between two close options, see, they're called close, but there's only one that is valid. Close does not mean correct. So now this answer is going to it. Here I can't motivate you. Here you have to learn various error types. That's the only way. That, okay, this was extreme, this was narrow, this was broad, and hence this should be eliminated. So building that process of elimination and then trusting it. I think a lot of my students build it, but making them trust it is a longer journey. That, okay, if you've thought of it logically, now stick to it. Don't now go by, "Arey, ye to sahi lag raha hai, par dusre wala, let me just mark it." So yeah, this would be my suggestions to them. That first is persist, struggle, become friends with that thing gradually, and second is that be logical about it, conceptual about it, have a process of elimination. Yeah.
And for the students whose confidence breaks after low scores in mocks and the practice tests, what would be the first thing you would tell them to rebuild?
To revisit, rebuild. Uh, since their confidence has broken, I think we should work on that. I think a lot of times, when we are so preoccupied with our preparation, it becomes our whole world and we are not able to see the larger picture. And for a lot of us, the stakes are high as well. So we are unable to therefore see that larger picture. So my, uh, you know, if they ask me for suggestion, I always tell them it was just a mock, it was just a test, it was just one day, it was just 1 hour. For, let's say, if they took a sectional, it was just 40 minutes, right? It doesn't define the whole rest of your life. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but even cat does not define the whole rest of your life. Even your omits don't define it. So, sometimes just distancing yourself from the situation and having that perspective, that itself can be very calming. And it can then, kind of rebuild you for the next test. So, yeah.
And there's this one question that I also think about a lot. What we see when a student comes to you and says that I've been working hard for a very long time, yet I'm not able to get the desired results, right? And when we ask them, they're like, we are trying to put all our efforts into our preparation, right? So in your opinion, in your view, what is that difference between an effort and an effective effort?
So effective effort is always focused and specific. So, for example, the query itself, if a student tells me that I've been putting in efforts but not getting the results, so what efforts have you been putting? Right? Tell me that. So, be more specific. What are the results? Okay, fine. Let's say your score is fluctuating, but then maybe the difficulty level of the test is also fluctuating. So, being very specific, very logical, very focused in the prep, and very focused with your questions. In fact, drilling, I always tell them that, why is a big question that you need to ask for everything. Okay, I got this question wrong. Why? Okay, fine. I was able to narrow down to two close options, but not beyond that. Why? Was vocabulary in the option not clear to me? If that, then I need to work on vocabulary. So, by asking the why, I have now narrowed down the problem. If, let's say, vocabulary was not a concern, but let's say I remembered it incorrectly from the passage and I didn't go back. So now you've identified the problem that you're not going back. So by constantly asking why and filtering down, you can narrow down your problems and then have a very effective solution. Your preparation will be focused and effective then.
Yeah, that's true, I would say, which I think every student has or should keep in mind while preparing. So, Nikita, thank you so much for joining us today. I think you reminded us today that teaching English isn't just about rules. It's more about the rhythm, right? The classrooms are not just the spaces for questions, but places where your identities are built, right? Your perspectives are challenged, and your silence becomes expressive, right? I think from Delhi to Jammu to Rodha, I really think your journey is a love letter to learning itself, right? So thank you so much for turning those classrooms into sanctuaries and the English language into liberation of your expression, right? So thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you so much. That's a very beautiful way of putting it, love letter to learning. In fact, I have this tattoo. So these are double inverted commas. When you earlier asked me my punctuation mark, this didn't strike me. So maybe this, epistolary approach, this love letter is kind of signified by these quotes. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. That I think lovely. So, but thanks a lot for sharing all your insights with us. All those things which go behind you working as a teacher, you taking classes, you teaching the students about all the concepts, using different anecdotes that you use, which are very very interesting. In fact, I also found them very very interesting, the examples that you took you mentioned about that you use in the sessions. I think that was super fun for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you and thank you for having me.
Yep. So to all the viewers out there, this was your host Ananya with Nikita ma'am. Keep tuned in for more such lovely conversations with our beloved mentors. Goodbye. See you in the classes.